Hey, everybody, welcome to the show. Today, I'm going to be talking with a remarkable woman who evolved into a servant leader as a result of experiencing severe trauma. Amanda Blackwood is an accomplished artist, author, public speaker, podcast host, trauma recovery mentor, and survivor of human trafficking. She has shared her story on many platforms, including the Chicago Tribune, at international summits, and on radio programs. Amanda has published over a dozen books and sold her artwork internationally. In addition, she has launched two, well, now I understand three podcasts. One of the three podcasts focuses on interviewing other authors of trauma, and another one discusses the long-term consequences of trauma and how to fight back for a better life.
I am super excited to be here with you.
Excellent, excellent. So let me just start by asking you, can you briefly describe your journey into becoming a victim of human trafficking?
Well, as with most survivors of human trafficking, we're no strangers to early childhood abuse, and that's kind of what set me up for that road. So my earliest experience of molestation happened, as far as I can remember, when I was only 4 years old. It was my older brother. He was only 7, so even now I have to acknowledge and understand that there's no way he would have known how to do these things. He wouldn't have had this curiosity at 7 years old if something hadn't been shown to him or done to him. So I've never really, since understanding that this happened, I've never really blamed him for it. But not having a place to blame, I felt like I had no outlet to let go of this anger. It happened again and again and again throughout my life, especially in my teen years, 12, 13, 15. I was molested over and over again. I was raped at 17 years old by somebody that I thought was my best friend and I had known for several years. So
Wow.
when I was trafficked 3 different times. The first time happened when I was 18, and the second time happened when I was 19. And the third time happened when I was 31 years old.
Wow.
When it happened, every single time I was trafficked, I look back now and I recognize that I had significant needs in my life, emotional needs, physical needs. These people were offering to fill these needs. And it kind of threw me in the direction of trusting in them and depending upon them. But having grown up in this abusive household, my father was physically abusive, my mother was mentally and emotionally abusive. I learned that the people that you trust and love are the ones that are also going to hurt you. And if they don't hurt you, that means they don't love you.
Mm-hmm.
So here I was ending up in all of these relationships over and over again, where I was depending on somebody for an emotional need, a physical need, and they were abusive people who had me now under their control. But I didn't see it as being abusive at the time. I saw it as being just a part of life. It's amazing what we can do to ourselves when we have this mindset of, don't worry about it, I'll get through this. I've been through worse. Such a dangerous mindset. Thinking like this has been known to end people's lives. Now, the first time I was trafficked, it was a boyfriend. I was 18. He was in his 30s. He was more than twice my age. And he had offered me a place to live and affection. And he loaned me out to a buddy of his for a birthday weekend after I had been with him for several months. And we ended up in Las Vegas. I was locked in a small hotel room for 52 hours. I was repeatedly assaulted. I was allowed to have room service delivered only once a day, but the hotel staff was paid off to make sure that they didn't hang around the door and ask questions. They dropped off the cart at the door, knocked on the door, and left. The hotel knew this was happening. This was a real problem. This was 1998. This was a major problem in Las Vegas back then. It's still a major problem now, except now with the internet, it's harder to catch them. You know, you don't have to pay off the front desk anymore.
Wow.
I knew that if I got through that 52 hours with that same mindset, I've been through worse, I can get through this. Then I could get back to where it was that I had been living. I can get back my ID card because this man had it. I could get my things and I could get out. Because as much as I had lived through abuse to that point, I had never been through abuse like this. Something inside me broke. I felt like this man took a piece of my soul. It was just this repeated pattern of he'd go downstairs and gamble, he'd come upstairs and he would do what he wanted to do to me, and then he would pass out and go to sleep for the whole 52 hours. If I had left the room, I didn't have a key to be able to get back in. He had my ID. I wouldn't have been able to go to the police because I didn't have any identification or proof of who I was. I had no way to get back to Arizona without him, which is where I was living at the time. It was just this horrible situation. I saw no possibility of finding help in any way. When I got back, I left as quickly as possible. I found my way out to Florida. I was a bit of a drifter. And the plan at the time was to go and stay with my grandmother. I had injured myself on the job working at a horse farm. I needed surgery done on my knee. My dad's mother lived in Daytona Beach, and the plan was to go there and stay with her while I got my knee surgery done and recover. I already had a job lined up for afterward, and I could move on with my life. And I got down there. I was at the Daytona Beach bus station about 10:30 at night when I called my grandmother to let her know, hey, I'm here. This is 1999 now. I'm here. I'm ready for you to come and pick me up at the bus station so that we can go back to your house. And I appreciate you willing to do this for me. But while I was in transition to get to Daytona Beach, my parents had called her and told her that if she took me in, they would never speak to her again. So her husband, my dad's stepfather, answered the phone and said, we're not coming to get you. You're on your own. Good luck. I had $5 to my name. So my need right then was for safety, security, and shelter. And a young couple came and found me sitting on the side of the road, bawling my eyes out. They listened to me as best they could through the sobs. I was probably not easy to understand. And then they told me that they had a place for me to come, and I could stay with them until I could get on my feet. And what they really meant was that I could stay with them until they found the highest bidder, because that's what happened. They sold me to a man named Esteban. I was locked up for 23 and a half hours in a small room with no food, no water, and no bathroom facilities. But I had grown up an 80s and 90s kid, and there was this TV show back in the day called MacGyver, and the guy could fix anything with a paperclip and a rubber band, and I was in love with him. Richard Dean Anderson was my hero. When I was a teenager, I wanted to be just like him. I wanted to marry him. I loved this guy. And in that very scary, very dark moment in this dark room, I sat down and I thought to myself, what would MacGyver do? And I got out of that room thanks to the help of watching this TV show in the 80s and 90s.
Wow.
I got smart. And when I left, I didn't stop running. I got as far away from there as quickly as I could. And the farthest I could get while the weather was still tolerable was California. I wasn't going to go north. I don't like the rain and snow, which is surprising that I live in Colorado now. But I made my way out to California. And while I was out there, I started looking for some kind of a direction in my life. I was very lost. I felt pretty alone. I had a lot of first dates that didn't pan out. I was looking for this companionship. I started getting into modeling and acting. I was on Alias and Will and Grace, and I modeled for Harley Davidson. I did a couple of Blue Jean commercials, and I did a cosmetics ad, and I did some really cool stuff. And I was meeting lots of people, but these people were really shallow, and it still wasn't that human connection that I was longing for. And in 2004, when I was 24 years old, that's when internet dating kind of started becoming a thing. And I hopped on there and I met people in the world of internet dating. And there was one guy in particular that I really connected with. He lived really far away, so we knew that, this was not going to progress beyond friendship, but we both felt this connection, and we knew that we were going to have something special. So we would get on Skype and we would have meals together and share what our day was or what it was going to look like, depending on our time zone. And this happened for years. I watched his little girl grow up in these video chats, and we got to know each other. Eventually, I found myself in a job as a mall cop, worked my way up through the ranks, and became a director of public safety and security for 6 different properties in LA County. I got an $11,000 a year raise. I got raises for all of my employees. I redesigned the scheduling system for the company, which was an international company. I found something I was good at. I was really focusing on it. And this guy that I had been connected to for these 7 long years had come over to visit me. I'd gone over to visit him. And he finally decided that he decided we were in love. And he asked me to get a fiancé visa to move over to be with him. And I knew this meant giving up my employees, who were all like family members to me. I had grown to love these people. They had become my family. I knew that it meant giving up my career. And the car was the first car that I had ever bought for myself. It was my first apartment with only my name on the lease. I had no roommates. I had a cat. It would mean giving up all of this stuff to go and be with this man because he was in Scotland. But it was the land of kings and castles and fairy tales and dreams come true. And this is what every little girl who grows up watching Disney movies absolutely dreams of experiencing in their lives. It took him 7 years to get me there, and it took him 7 days to start trafficking me.
Oh my Lord. Wow.
I was devastated. I mean, the first week there was absolutely beautiful. I could go anywhere I wanted. I could do anything I wanted as long as he approved. But I was used to that in my life. I had experienced so much abuse in my life, so many controlling, manipulative behaviors, that this was just a part of everything else that I had ever experienced. He loved me and he wanted to watch out for me. I was so wrong. After that first week, when the abuse started, the front door of his home became a revolving door, and people would come in and shell out to be able to abuse me. If I didn't comply, food was withheld. I went through sleep deprivation, and I was waterboarded for sport.
Wow.
I wanted out very quickly. He had already taken my passport, my driver's license, debit card, all that stuff within 2 hours of me landing in Scotland. And I knew I needed to get that stuff back. So one night while the abuse was happening, I knew that I had experience being a waitress. I had done that for quite a while, and I knew what it meant to be a diner waitress where you don't allow somebody to see the bottom of their coffee cup. I did that with his whiskey glass. I got him very drunk that night. And at the end of the evening, after the guests had left, I told him, I said, I still have some money in my American bank account, and I'm planning on staying here. So if you give me back all of my stuff, then tomorrow I can go down to the bank and pull out the money and then give it to you so that we can spend it. Because otherwise it's just going to sit there in that bank and do nothing forever. And he bought into it, gave me back all of my information. And the next morning, the first thing I did was jump on a computer and buy the first flight out that I could afford. The first flight out was $12,000, and I only had a little over $2,000 in my bank account. So I couldn't get the first flight or the second flight or even the third day. I had to wait 5 days to be able to fly out of there. But again, I had this mentality of, I've been through worse. I can survive the next 5 days. There's no way I could have known that I nearly didn't. I ended up with a kidney infection so severe from the abuse that was happening that I was in the hospital the moment that flight took off. And it was a non-refundable flight, and all I had was $11 left in my bank. And I'd lost everything. I lost hope. I tried to commit suicide by train. I felt like there was no hope left for me. This was all my life was ever going to be. And after I tried to commit suicide, there was that day at the train station, this man came out onto the platform, and I'd been praying all day, walking around town, please send somebody to see me. And this man walked out on the platform, and he looked at me, and he saw that I was smoking a cigarette. Yeah, I had already determined it was going to be my last one. And he asked me for a light. So I gave him my matches, and I told him, you can keep them. I won't need them anymore. And my hope was that he would ask me why. and he didn't ask. And I knew I couldn't make this stranger ask. I couldn't make this stranger care. He was another one of the people who was just traveling his way through this life saying, it's not my problem.
Hmm.
And I knew I couldn't depend on this person to do anything about what was happening to me. But then this little boy walked out onto the platform and he ran up to this man and he took his hand. This little guy was probably about 4 years old. And he looked at me, and this child, when he looked at me, he did not look at me with the eyes of a child. He saw me. And it scared the daylights out of me because nobody had really seen me in years. It took about 20 seconds for me to realize that I wasn't running towards the train. I was running back toward what had been my prison. And I was grateful and thankful because I knew that if I was going to be kept alive in that moment, there had to be something more to my life. I had finally been seen by somebody, and the reason it scared me was because that little boy looked at me the way you would look at somebody that you know so well. And I didn't even know myself that well. I sat down and started trying to formulate a plan and putting together these little breadcrumb pieces, and I had been studying on my own, studying psychology for many years. And I'd learned about trauma bonding, which is what we used to call Stockholm Syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to make this man believe that I had a trauma bond so deep that I would do anything for him. And I knew with him being a police officer, he would know what this was too. He would recognize the signs. So I kept on leaving these little breadcrumbs and doing whatever and just complying with anything and everything and never complaining, going above and beyond and cooking fabulous dinners, even when I didn't feel like it, even when I was depressed and angry and hurt and scared. I did it anyway. And at the end of the next several months, I finally sat him down. I said, I've been out here for 5 months now. I was out here on a fiance visa. And the day that we had picked and told them that we were going to get married is already come and gone. So we have a couple of options here. We can either get married, and I was praying he didn't take that route, or you can send me back to California. Because if I stay here and overstay my visa, then I could get kicked out of the UK if they discover it and never allowed back according to UK law. You could also lose your job as a police officer. And we don't want that to happen, do we? So if you send me back, I can live there for 6 months, and then I can come back in time for Christmas, and it would be our first Christmas together. And wouldn't that be wonderful? And because I had been an actress in Hollywood, and because I knew how to do these things, he bought it. And by bought it, I don't mean just the story. I mean the round trip airfare. Within 2 hours, I had a round trip flight to go back to California for 6 months and then return to Scotland in December, just in time for Christmas. But it didn't end just because I got on that flight and left. I got back to California and I tried to go into hiding. He came looking for me. I saw him banging on the neighbor's door. He had my address off by a single number. He found out my phone number. He found out my social media information. And he started posting photos and videos that he had taken during the molestations and rapes and putting them up on different photo sharing websites. Whenever I would have a new job, he would send this same information to my employer, and I've lost jobs over it. He would send the same photos and videos to any friends that I would make or anybody he found out that I was starting to get close to, and I would lose friends. I shut down, and I tried to report him, and his bosses came back after several months of a supposed investigation and told me that they saw no clear evidence of abuse. I tried my best to fight, and I had lost so much in that fight, feeling like nobody was listening, nobody was paying attention. Finally, in 2016, I packed up my rental SUV and I drove from California to Colorado, just looking for a new place to start over, looking for a new life, some kind of hope, because I didn't have any left. He had just destroyed everything that I had after 14 years of living out there. When I got to Colorado, I was thinking everything is going to be fine now. I'm going to have this great life and I can be me again. But in 2019, I discovered that he had once more taken all those photos and videos and he put them up on a pornography website and made me famous overnight. He was making money off of me still.
Mm.
I was devastated. I had no idea what it was going to do. So I reached out to an anti trafficking organization, to a friend of mine who worked at one. And she put me in touch with another group who immediately paired me up with pro bono legal services to help fight this stuff. They started reaching out to these pornography websites and having this stuff pulled down. And then the other human trafficking organization paired me up with a counselor. This counselor was pretty new. She was still in school, and I'm pretty sure I traumatized her so much that I think she's left the practice. Um, she wasn't ready to deal with that kind of trauma. She had no idea what to do with it. So they paired me up with another one. And this one, I went in with my eyes wide open. I knew that she had already worked with several other survivors of trafficking, so she knew what to expect in a way. And I told her, I have two very strict rules. Number one, do not come at me with prescription medication right out of the gate. I don't want a Band-Aid. I want a shovel. And number two, do not treat me like I am a fragile porcelain doll. Don't walk on eggshells. Don't pull the punches. Give it to me straight. Because if I was going to break, I would have done that already. Now let's get busy. We went through this therapy session for 1.5 years. And at the beginning, it was twice or 3 times a week. Towards the end, it was about once a month. Yeah, everything she helped me to get over these speed bumps. I was stuck in so many different areas and I didn't know how to move beyond them. And she helped me to do that. And towards the end of our therapy, it was November of 2020. She asked me, she said, I'm not sure that there's much more that I can do to be able to help you. I'm always here for you. But I know you well enough to know that you're not going to stop your journey here. So what are you going to do next? I told her, I said, I think I'm ready to write my book. She said, don't you already have some? I said, yeah, I do. But the book, my autobiography. And she said, oh, that's great. Christmas is around the corner. If you need me, I'm here. But in the meantime, let's just take December off. I'll check in with you in January. When she called me in January, she asked me, so how's it going? I told her, I said, oh, I'm doing great. How are you doing? She says, no, not you. How is it going? How's the book going? I said, it's done. She said, what do you mean it's done? Aren't you still working 2 full-time jobs? Is this a short book or something? And no, it's 350 pages. I wrote the entire thing in the month of December. I learned
Wow.
so much more about myself by just being able to have that outlet. And she said, now what are you going to do? I told her, I said, I don't know. She said, I want you to try painting. And I told her, anytime I've ever tried painting, it looks like a very multicolored snowman laying down on his side. It's usually just a couple of big colorful blobs on a page. I don't know how to paint. And she said, I want you to try anyway. I'm going to send somebody over with paintbrushes and paints and canvases. And I want you to just try. It doesn't matter what it looks like. Just paint about what you're thinking or feeling and just give it a shot. It had been a long time since I had tried painting. So I gave her the benefit of the doubt.
Well, Amanda,
With
before you go on, I want to because this is such a compelling story. I'd like to go back a little bit and talk to you a little bit about, because first of all, I was speechless, and that's hard for me when just hearing your story. Um, Such a remarkable story and your journey, and how as you got counseling and so on, you were able to come out of it. But I want to go back to the whole human trafficking, the whole concept of it, because I think a lot of people don't really understand. Your story is like, it leaves one with their jaw. It's a jaw dropping story. And so I want to go back to the fact that, what do you think some of the most popular myths are about human trafficking. Like, for instance, you talked about, being at that train station and having this little kid actually connect with you on an emotional level. But I'm wondering how many of us are walking by people or walking by young women who are being trafficked and not responding to their desperate call or cry for help. So, what are some of these myths about human trafficking, and how do we begin to recognize when someone is in that kind of trouble?
So, probably one of the biggest myths is people don't understand, first of all, what it really means, human trafficking. If you Google it, you get a completely different answer than if you look it up on a more reputable site. So, my favorite definition and the most commonly used definition is the one from the Department of Homeland Security: the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or commercial sex acts from another person. So there's some key takeaways here is to recognize that there's no mention of transportation. We think trafficking, we think that means like being on the road in traffic, right? That's where our brains go because we have this word association. You do not have to transport somebody to traffic them. There's also no mention of money. There's a mention of commercial sex acts. So there can be money involved, but it can also be a trade. It can be any number of things commercialized. It can be massage parlors. It can be whatever is commercialized in that world. So prostitution is not the same thing as human trafficking. Human smuggling is not the same thing as human trafficking. There's massive overlaps in all these areas and they all need to be addressed, but it's important to recognize another key factor here. In that definition of human trafficking, there's no mention of age. We are obsessed with the hashtag Save the Children. And while it is absolutely awful that this stuff does happen to children, they make up 1/4 of all victims here in the United States. That means 3/4 of all victims are over the age of 18, just like I was. That means the law is not interested in really helping somebody who's over the age of 18 and stuck in this constant cycle of abuse. It's really difficult to find resources for somebody over the age of 18. Plenty for anybody under. Another key factor for the myths about human trafficking is the kidnap scenario. We see it all the time on Facebook and on Nextdoor and all these social media where people talk about they were followed in a grocery store, or somebody found an Apple AirTag on their car and, oh my gosh, this has to be a human trafficking scenario. These people may be pedophiles. Might be rapists, molesters, serial killers, and the odds of them being one of those things instead of a trafficker is much higher. And that's because human traffickers, as with all three of the times that I was trafficked, they would rather take the easy way out. Grabbing somebody off the streets is not going to be the easy way out because that kid, that human, that adult is going to fight like their life depends on it, because in a lot of cases it does. What they're going to do is they are going to get to know somebody and they are going to emotionally manipulate them into doing what they want. And it might start with little things at first, but the more they get this control over them, the more they can get them to do things that they don't want to do. And that's where the force, fraud, or coercion comes in.
Wow, that's interesting, because it explains how does one get seduced into trafficking in the first place, or human trafficking in the first place. And thank you for that description, because that's very comprehensive. And I think you're right. Most people don't understand that. Now, what are the most popular forms of trafficking that happens in the United States? We hear about, and the media all often talks about trafficking, particularly in other countries, and how people are also taken from this country to another country and so on. But it's not much talked about how it's done in the United States. And so, what is the difference? Because you ended up in another country. So, how does it happen here? And how does it perhaps, you gave a very good example just of your own life of how one ends up in another country being trafficked.
Right. When I first went over to Scotland, it was absolutely under my own rule. It was my decision to go because he had presented himself to be somebody else entirely. I bought into this illusion, and that they're very, very good at this. But it was the same thing when I was in Arizona. It was the same thing when I was in Florida. It was these people who were offering me things that I found an emptiness in my life. They were looking to fill that emptiness within me, that love, that acceptance, that shelter, whatever I needed at that time. This man knew me for 7 years and knew what I wanted more than anything else was a happy and functional relationship. When you grow up being abused, this is your greatest dream. For many years, my greatest ambition was to be a good wife to a man who deserved it. Yeah, I had that opportunity now, but that's not really a healthy healthy goal in life, is to have that be everything that you want, you know. So going back and looking at all of this, the number one trafficking here in the United States is not what they talk about on the news, even when they do talk about trafficking here in the US. What they talk about here in the US is sex trafficking. And that is what happened to be percent of all trafficking cases in the US.
Hmm.
Only 14. It's a pretty small, insignificant almost number. I mean, you're still talking about a lot of people, but the number one form of trafficking here in the US is actually labor trafficking. You know, we bring
Interesting.
people in from overseas, we smuggle them into the country, and then these traffickers are saying, okay, now you owe us $10,000 for having done this for you. So you need to come to work in my restaurant, in my hair salon, in my nail salon. You need to work in this massage parlor. And these people are then forced into this world, and they think they don't have any other options. They don't have any rights, because if anybody found out that they were being abused and they went to the authorities and tried to report them, they would more than likely be deported from the country back to where they came from, because they're not here legally. They didn't go through the legal channels. They were smuggled into the country. So labor trafficking is growing exponentially
Hmm.
because of this constant fear. But that same fear exists in sex trafficking too. So a lot of victims of sex trafficking are fearful of going to the authorities. In my case, the man who was trafficking me the last time was a police officer. In other cases, the victims are treated as though they are prostitutes, whether they are or are not. And they end up with a criminal rap sheet because they're seen as performing an illegal job. Prostitution is illegal. So they are then victimized by the police further. When they are let out, the people who often pay their debts to pay their bonds are the traffickers. So now they owe money back to their trafficker, and they have to work at this illegal job even harder to be able to pay them back. So you've still got a debt bondage. You've still got a labor bondage here, as well as the sex trafficking on top of that. Yeah. There are other forms of human trafficking. The most prevalent in Africa is child soldiers and child marriages. And they're all forms of human trafficking, but those two are very rare here. Other parts of the world, they also have organ trafficking, where people are slaughtered or operated on for organ transplants. That only makes up about 2% of the human trafficking cases in the world. So that one is very rare, and you can't really do that here because you don't have the ability to do that kind of a surgery in most places here in the US.
Wow, that is tremendous. You are extremely knowledgeable about this. And we can't hear, I think, enough of it because this information needs to get out and people need to become more aware of these kinds of situations. If there is someone out there who perhaps might sense or know, someone in the audience that might sense or know that somebody who is being trafficked, according to your definition and your explanation, what can they do to help this person?
It's key to recognize that if you don't know what resources are available to you, it's the same as not having resources. So, one of the first things that we should do is Get involved, ask them, are you okay? Even if they're lying, make sure that they have resources, make sure they understand that what they're going through is not okay. Um, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is very helpful. We also now have 988 instead of 911. So if the person that you're talking to is afraid of reaching out to 911, because that's when you get all the swirling lights, the police, the fire, if they call 988, they get paired up with a clinical psychologist and many times somebody with lived experience that can talk them through standing on the edge of this dangerous place and help them to find other resources available to them. Here in Colorado, there's an organization down in Colorado Springs called Compass 31 that does fantastic work with survivors of trafficking. There's also Beautiful Feet Wellness up here in Denver. They do these incredible retreats and yoga and mindfulness technologies, just helping people to get through it and cope with it. Find these resources for these people if you feel like that's something that they're going to need. And if they're experiencing it, just know they need it.
Wow. Um, can you tell me, in terms of what what did you draw upon? Because your story is absolutely amazing. But what was it that you believe that really kept you through the whole time? And then I want you to talk a little bit about what is happening in your life today. But how did you talked about your counselor, you talked about your journey with her, and then how you begin to really rediscover yourself through your artwork and all of the things that you were doing in order to become well again. Someone who has suffered as much abuse as you have, one would might think this is damaged goods. This is never going to be the same again. What is it? Your story is a miracle story. How were you able to pull yourself out of all of the trauma that you experienced?
I thought I was damaged goods. It wasn't until I learned how to start talking about it that I really started to truly begin that healing journey. That attack in 2019, I decided that if he's going to add all of my social media and contact information on these pornography websites, that if people were going to keep finding me, they needed to understand why. That's when I started speaking about it. And at first it was really quiet. It was very soft. But there was this voice that kept on telling me, speak up, get louder, get louder. And I believe that was my faith. I've always been a believer in God. I've always kind of held on to that, even in my darkest moments. And I've had a lot of people try to attack that and say, you know, if you believe in God, why do you think God allows things like this to happen? Hey, we're the ones that broke the rules. I'll just leave it at that. But having that basis of faith and knowing that my God is there to catch me when I fall. He's got me. He's protecting me. Even if I don't make it out of this alive, he's still got me. He's still protecting me. I'm going to be okay. That was huge. That was huge. So when I met the man that's now my husband, it was 1 month pretty much immediately after my autobiography was published on my 10-year anniversary of freedom. It was the
Wow.
same time that my painting that was sold to a home for human trafficking survivors in Chicago was unveiled at a special event. And that's when the Chicago Tribune wanted to interview me and do this great big story. And that's when I said to myself, any person who's going to be in my life needs to know about all this because this is important to me. They need to understand that I am going to occasionally have these trauma reactions. They need to understand that I don't mean to take anything out on them personally. And I am working on this. I am a work in progress, and I will be for the rest of my life. You know, going through something like this, you don't just wave a magic wand and make it all go away. It's going to stick with you. But you can learn healthier coping mechanisms to dealing with all of this. And recognizing all of that and studying up on it and learning all of these things, That's what got me to where I am now.
Excellent, excellent. The other thing I was going to ask you, you were talking about your artwork. How has what you experienced reflected in your paintings and your artwork?
My gosh, it's come out in so many different ways. So the painting that was sold to the Home for Human Trafficking Survivors, I have a print of it that I hang in my studio. It's called Carry Your Own Baggage. And that's because it looks like it's a beautiful sunny day, but here's this woman who's trekking up this big hill, and she has to carry her own suitcase. And we all have to carry our own baggage through life until we find a safe place to set it down. And that came out of me within 5 months of when I first started painting. I started to discover that I had these stories that I wanted to tell, and instead of putting them into books, I could tell the story with brushstrokes. I've told stories now of a near-death experience that I had when I was 20 in a painting. I've told stories of abuse in paintings in very dark forms where I don't have to articulate with words what it is that I have felt or been through. It's still a way of expressing it and getting it out. And one of the greatest things about being able to do this is that when I write it down or I paint it, I can physically see it. And it is now separate from me. It is no longer a part of my body. I can walk away from it.
That's interesting. That's interesting. How art is sort of is therapeutic in its own right. Interesting. Well, you have so much in you. You are an amazing speaker. I advise anyone to invite you to come and share more about this topic because, as I said, I can't see it needs to be talked about more, and it needs to be one of those things that we are able to advocate for because we understand what it is and know what it is when we see it. So I'd like to land our plane with if people want to learn more about you, perhaps buy some of your books, or they're interested in trauma, interested in more about what you have to say, we can possibly cover all the years that you spent and all the things that you've learned along the way. How could they reach out to you?
So, probably one of the easiest ways to interact with me on a real time basis is on Facebook. I'm very active on Facebook, probably too active. I should be writing more books instead of playing on Facebook. Um, I also have an Instagram. I'm rarely ever on Twitter, but I have one. But probably the easiest way to reach out to me is just to send me an email. Just let me know, hey, I heard you on Dr. Lena's show. I've got questions. Just send me an email, authoramandablackwood@gmail.com. I will answer whatever questions I possibly can. Just know that I am not a licensed therapist or counselor, and I cannot counsel or therapy somebody through their trauma. I can help them to find the resources available to them, and I can help them to discover what their trauma reactions are. But that's about my limitations.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. You have brought tremendous value to the show today. As I said, it's an amazing story, but it's a story not so much of darkness, but of hope. So
Yeah.
thank you again for being a part of the show today.
Thank you very much.